share your story with us, please.
Thanks, Nick. One would think that I would not need notes to tell my story, but one would be wrong. One of the benefits of having brain damage is short-term memory issue, and so I try not to rely too much on memory. Yeah, when Randy was kind enough to call and ask me if I would mind telling my story, I thought, well, you know, I do this a fair amount, and hopefully you'll come to understand why shortly, and I'll try not to keep this too long tonight, Randy, so if I run too long, just run the flag up back there and I'll quit. But I meet with medical students, I meet with students at Graduate School of Physical Therapy at Belmont. I meet with interns, residents. I meet with stroke survivors to tell this story, and occasionally other places. My story is not a real exciting story. It's not exciting and does compare to some of the stories that some of our young men and women who are in the military who have near-death experiences have had. Those experiences, this doesn't compare. But it seemed to be important to the medical community, and it certainly is important to me because I lived it and managed to survive it. So why would you be interested perhaps in hearing about a fellow who had a stroke 20-something years ago and managed to survive it? What can we learn about this? Well, maybe there's a few life lessons that are worth mentioning. Maybe we need to learn to listen to what our bodies are telling us before it's too late. And to get a commercial in from my lawyer friends, let's don't wait until post-death to do our estate planning. Post-death estate planning is kind of difficult to do. And the other thing is how vital family is in any crisis like this. What family can do, and there's some things that family does simply not do as well as professionals who are trained to do. And I'm a very strong advocate of professional rehab. I've been through rehab 3 times at this point in time, all of it having to do with physical problems. But let me tell you a little bit about my story, and so that you'll get the setting perhaps. This event that I'm about to describe happened February 7, 1993, several years ago. Up until that time, I'll tell you a little bit about who I was before that, what happened to me, and how I think it changed my life, and my attitude about living in general. At that time, I was a senior partner in a local CPA firm, a firm with about 10 or 12 people involved totally. Everybody knew everybody, very close-knit firm. I started working in public accounting in 1959, so if you started adding up the tax seasons, there's been 57 of them. They seem to come awfully fast now. At that time, when this event occurred, I was playing music. I had started out, like many people in Nashville, to be a country music star, and fortunately, I'm one of the lucky ones. I learned at a very young age that I did not have the talent to survive in that business. It's an interesting experience. I got to do some radio work, worked on a few recording sessions, did some early TV in Nashville. But like I say, I was lucky. But nonetheless, even though I couldn't make a career of that, I continued to play music and still do today. Also, as a young man, I learned to fly airplanes. I call that part of my misspent youth. Actually, I was about 19 or 20 years, well, I was 20 years old when I started, I guess. Got a commercial license, and for a short while, flew an airplane for a small construction company. That was great fun when it started, but I also figured out at an early age that I probably didn't have what it took to become a commercial pilot or fly for one of the airlines. At that time, there were a lot of ex-military pilots around who had all the trainings and credentials. So I just flew for this little company until I decided I better do something else for a living. At the time, I was still going to school. Married young, started having children young. My first child was born when I was 19 years old. It's a little over 60 years ago now, and when Sue and I got married, and our daughter will be 60 years old her next birthday. But I started young. So as we come along to 1993, tax season has started. It's February 1993, and so I'm getting ready for another busy tax season. I'm a workaholic. I know some of these folks in here have known me for a long, long time. Was I a workaholic, Ken? Yes, I was. Yes, worked all the time. I began to have some things occur that should have sent a message to me, and it did not. I began to have quick, sudden onset headaches, blurring of the vision. I would take an Advil or something like that, and ibuprofen, and just lie down for a while, and it would go away. But what I had done was diagnose myself that what I had was a vision problem. I did have some glasses adjustments and so forth, so I called my ophthalmologist, this fellow I had some relationship with. He knew me and I knew him, and said, look, I told his office, I'm having this problem with his vision, sudden headaches and blurred vision and so forth, so you got to fix my glasses. Well, as it turned out, he was ill, so I saw one of his associates who was covering for him that day. And the fella, and his name is etched in my memory, but I dare not mention it to you here today. But what he did was, did a very thorough exam and said, you have one of these newfangled cell phones. Remember, this was 24 years ago. Yes, sir, I have one of those newfangled cell phones. He said, well, the problem is you simply fried your brain with your cell phone. You'll be all right. Let's get some new glasses, and sent me on down the road. That was on Thursday afternoon. I still didn't feel well. I took his advice, went ahead and took my prescription to the optician and so forth to get it filled. Friday, I didn't do anything. I didn't go in the office, took a day off. Saturday morning came, and my youngest son, who was a student at that time at the University of Tennessee, had come home quite unexpectedly for the weekend, which turned out to be a forced event for me. So he was home, and at that time, I was doing a good bit of sailplane flying at Eagleville, Tennessee, where there is a sailplane glider port, if some of you may know. So I decided this Saturday morning, February 7, 1993, broke bright and clear. It was like a spring day. It was beautiful white puffy clouds were beginning to form. And if you ever flown a sailplane or fly at all, you know the puffy clouds up there are the top thermals. That means that air is rising. And if you fly a sailplane, that's a good thing. So we decided to go fly that day. I'd been teaching him to fly, and he was to the point where I was teaching him to do some mild aerobatics in the sailplane. So we drove down to Eagleville, got the sailplane out, got a tow, and towed up a couple thousand feet, turned the tow plane loose, and just flew into the greatest thermals you ever see. I mean, we were climbing at 700-800 feet a minute in a sailplane, just climbing like this, winding up. So we were doing mild aerobatics, and I was teaching him how to recover from mild aerobatics and so forth. And we'd flown for about an hour and a half. We'd glide down and climb back up, glide down and find another thermal, climb back up. And his headache began again. And I began to get very sick and severe headaches. So my son Max could fly reasonably well, but I was not comfortable with him landing a $100,000 sailplane yet. So he flew back to the airport and lined up on the runway. I managed to land the airplane without tearing it up. And he drove me home. He turned the airplane in and drove me home. That afternoon, I just laid around and rested and got feeling somewhat better. And I'd been teaching a Sunday school class for a number of years at church, and Sunday morning came. I decided, can't do that this morning. Just don't feel right. So I asked my wife, Sue, to make a call to someone else to cover the class, which she did. I lay on the couch for a little while. Really didn't feel very well. So I decided, well, I'll shower and shave and I'll feel better. So I managed to get through the showering, but when I got to the shave, things just weren't right. So I started down the hallway back to the bedroom, thought I'll just lie down for a while. And I realized that I couldn't stand. I only got back there by holding onto the wall and fell on the bedroom floor. Of course, that'll create a lot of confusion on Sunday morning. So my wife awakened my son, and I was sick, just simply laying on the floor. I did not have the ability to get up and didn't know where help was, which is an odd feeling. So she called a physician and got whoever was filling in for him that day and said, well, take him to the emergency room. And it was fortunate that my son Max was home, because he literally picked me up and carried me to the car. Got to the emergency room. Shortening the story a little bit, got to the emergency room at what was in the old Parkview Hospital. The initial diagnosis was migraine headache. No, I never had a migraine headache in my life. Well, you have a history of migraines? No, no migraines. What about your family? No, no migraines. Well, it's a migraine headache. Well, I didn't know this was what a migraine headache was, and I lay there for a little while and got sicker and sicker. And so they said, well, let's just go do a CT scan and see what we can find. So I go whirling off down the hall on one of those gurney things, you know. There is some humor in this, by the way, later. You're going to find humor in everything. There is some humor. And so the CT scan comes back, and on the way back up, this lovely little nurse walks up beside the gurney thing and said, we don't see a thing. It's all clear. You're safe. You just have a migraine headache. And I thought, boy, this is lovely. I'll be glad when this is over. Got back to the emergency room and said, well, we better admit you. This seems to be an awfully severe migraine, but unfortunately there are no beds available, so you'll have to stay in the emergency room until tonight. Okay, well that's another lucky thing, because I got sicker and sicker and sicker. Projectile vomiting starts, things begin to fade away. And by this time, someone had called a neurologist, a fellow named Alfred S. Callahan III. Yes, we have other fans of Alfred S. Callahan III here. So our friend, now friend, at that time he was a stranger, Fred Callahan, came out and said, well, you know, this is strange, something going on here. So by that time I was just really sick and projectile vomiting. And at about that time there came what I describe as an explosion in the brain, in the head. And at this point in time, the vision went away. I fell back on the gurney, and I guess at this point in time, my wife took things in her hands and called for the doc. They came running in and said, well, listen, we best get him down for an MRI. And at that point in time, on the left hemisphere, there's just white pulsating light. I had, at this point in time, vision faded away. I could no longer see it except for the image of the white pulsating light on the left side. Sound begins to fade away. It was as if someone was speaking through a tube in the other room, kind of like when you're in an airport and you hear somebody being called, you know, with so-and-so call, you know, so forth like that, really distant. I was back and I was conscious, but I didn't have the ability to get up off the thing, could not communicate, couldn't talk, couldn't see, could still hear. And so things take on a magnified kind of response at that point in time. So I can remember being whirled away on that little four-wheel gurney again, and it felt like to me we were going 90 miles an hour. There's some points I'd like to make as we go along. So I go into the radiology, and the only reason I know I was in radiology, I could hear people talking. And this was Sunday, and they said, well, who did they call in for this on Sunday? Because the radiologist was not there on Sunday. They said, well, we called Dr. X. And I heard them say, it didn't register that it was really significant. Oh, not him, not on Sunday. So, that fell into place later. It didn't make much sense then. So I hear this dude come in, and they're being very respectful to him. Apparently, he's just a tyrant as a radiologist. So I get stuck up in that tube, and if you've ever had an MRI, it's kind of like crawling up in a culvert and letting somebody beat on it with a ball-peen hammer. So I can remember that. I could remember the sound, couldn't see anything. Come out of the thing, the noise stops, and everything is still, and I can hear this doctor say, you may as well get him out of here. This is a bad one. He won't last long. So that gurney goes 90 miles an hour back down the hallway, and I'm on it, chuck it, back to the emergency room. So Dr. Callahan is by this time talking with my family, and I can hear because it's just outside a curtain. And again, I can hear this, and it's registering, but it didn't mean much to me at that time. And he said to her, and I can't quote it, but what he was saying is, you might want to call the family. He probably won't last 72 hours. So, okay. I do remember laying there thinking, this is what it's like to die. There's the white pulsating going on. I can't communicate, can't see, and can't move. But I can still hear, although it seems it's at a distance. Well, I knew that I was dying. Well, at least I felt that I was. But there was no fear, no anxiety, no anticipation. It was just that that's what's going on. So the family came and gathered around. I only know this because I was told later that they did come. I could hear voices. It didn't make sense. I stayed in the emergency room, and they decided, well, he's not dying. So sometime late that evening, up in the night, they decided they would take me to the intensive care. And I did, went to intensive care. And at some point within the next day, I began to get some vision back. And I realized I'm in a strange place. And one of the things that the physicians and medical students and residents and so forth have quizzed me about so much is the fact that, for the most part, I was in that state of consciousness. And they would ask, well, what is like, what is this like, or what is that like, or what did you think, or what could you understand? I can't tell you that I understood a whole lot at that time, but I remember hearing what was said, and I could put it together later. There was no fear or anxiety about all of this. But anyway, so I'm in intensive care for 3 days, and progressively a little more conscious during that time. And the weird visual things, and what I had was what's called a brainstem stroke. Total loss of the left vertebral artery, and it's still lost. There's no blood flow, so I've lost that portion of blood flow to the brain. So I do have some permanent brain damage, which I try to conceal pretty well. But you get crossover symptoms with a brainstem stroke. And that's why I brought my notes, because some of the things that occurred as I began to come to consciousness and I began to assess the damage. And some of this we didn't learn, or the physicians didn't learn, and I didn't learn until several days. I was in intensive care for 3 days, and as I continued to breathe and the heart continued to beat, I was later moved to an interim stage in the hospital room for another week. I spent 6 weeks in the hospital altogether. But the results of a brainstem stroke, there's no hot and cold sensation in the right. My body was just split right down the middle. No hot and cold sensation on the right side. I had a loss of feeling on the left side. In fact, I still have no feeling here, but doesn't seem to interfere with life at all. The left side was the weak side and the muscle contraction. This is the side that drew up. Hypersensitive feeling to the touch on the right side, just a light touch felt like a pinprick. I had developed a thing called perseveration, and as I get fatigued, and maybe even tonight, you'll catch me repeating a word. I get stuck on a word and go through that word. And about all that one can do with perseveration is just come to a complete stop and think about what one is trying to say and start over. Ataxia, this imbalance where once I did start to attempt to walk again, my feet were about this far apart, which is another funny story for later. Nystagmus, the eyes ricocheted from left to right. It had to be interesting for folks coming in. You know, what's he doing? I had double vision, blurred vision. As I began to speak again with slurred speech, words didn't make sense. I called things by the wrong name. Probably the most unusual thing, and the thing that the medical community has been so interested in, is a total loss of spatial orientation. And what I mean by that, absolutely no orientation. It's up, down, east, west, right, left, or anything. So I'm lying in a bed, and I can't tell if I'm lying flat, if the bed's staying on the end. Now, immediately, and this is where I give credit to the professionals, immediately the physical therapist and occupational therapist began to work with me. So after a week in a hospital room, was transferred to an in-house physical therapy. And that's where it got funny. So they start by simply trying to get me to stand up. They stand me up, I fall down. They stand me up, I fall down. They take me down to the gym where the physical therapy stuff goes on, stand me up on the mat, and I fall down. So one of the things one uses is look at something vertical, such as a door facing, focus on that door facing, and then fall down. But over a period of time, one begins to get the feet under you, and they're squeezing balls and so forth and so on and so forth. But that month that I spent in in-house therapy, in physical therapy, first they let me get into a wheelchair. I learned to they put the wheelchair 45 degrees to the bed, lock the wheels and so forth, taught me how to slip off into the chair, and then I could paddle with the patch over my eye because I had double vision. And Ken would come see me, and I have the patch over here. Next day he'd come back and he'd say, by the way, you had the patch over here and it's over here. So I forget, and I'd move it. The idea was just to keep moving the patch so you don't get a lazy eye. But I just tell folks I'd forgotten where I put the patch. So as we get in, I'm beginning to think, well, you know, I've got to build upper body strength because the doctor's already told the director of the physical therapy facility that I will never walk again. First he said I'm not going to live, now he says I'm not going to walk again. The director of the physical therapy unit made a bet with him, actual money bet, that she would have me walk out of there. And he said, never happened. I learned about this later too. So I'm in my wheelchair, and I think what I really need to do is build that upper body strength. So I've got my patch on, my slurred speech, the left side's weak, but I start with a wheelchair. Well, the old Parkview Hospital, some of you may remember, was built in pieces, in sections. And interestingly, they don't line the floors up when they tie these together. So you go down this hallway, up an incline, back down, and down this incline, down, to a plate glass windows. My room's up here. So I would go around that thing, and I'd huff and puff and break into a sweat with my one eye squinting, go around that box. And I'd just get to the top of the downhill side. I would just let the wheelchair roll, and I'd grab the wheels when I got to the bottom. One of the things that we need to be aware of is that a person with brain damage, whether it's from a stroke, an accident, one's emotions are very close to the surface. It's easy to make the tears flow. It's easy to have the waters overflow. So I'm going around there and thinking I'm really doing a great job building this upper body strength. And so I come sliding down, grab my wheels and skid to a stop. And I'm just like a kid. Boy, they've let me out with my toy wagon. One of the head nurses came by and said, what are you doing? And my slurred speech, I told her I was building my upper body strength. And she said, you come with me. She rolled me back to my room, put me in my bed and took my wheelchair away. And said, you can have this tomorrow at 10 o'clock. She said, you're going out that plate glass window and you'll have more problems than you have now. My point there is the tears just flow. So be aware with your friends, your relatives, anyone going through this type of brain damage problem. The emotions are very close to the surface. But I got through that event. So I'm in the hospital, and I wake up in the middle of the night. This is about my third night in rehab. This was before the wheelchair incident, actually. I woke up during the night, and by the way, my room was just outside the nursing station. Severe headache. I thought, this may be serious. I may be having another stroke, and I'm still working on recovering from number one. So I lay there for a little while, and it gets more severe and more severe. I can't get out of bed by myself. I'm still in that state of not knowing where up was. And so I thought, best call the nurse. So I reach over and get the call device, which is on a long cable in those days. Now I think most of them in the bed. And I pull it over and squint down with my one good eye, and I hit the call button. Nothing. This is not good. So I keep hitting the call button, and nothing's happening. So I thought, and I'm in a room with the door shut. I can hear the nurses and so forth outside because they're right outside my door. So I'm not stupid. I think I'll just make lots and lots of noise and they'll come in here. So I take this thing with my stronger hand over here and start banging it on the rail of the bed. And I'm making lots of noise now, but I'm not enough that they can hear me out at the nurse's station. And the thing just shatters, comes all to pieces. So I'm sitting with the cable in my hand. That's no good, I'm going to die. So I drop the cable. And I get my pitcher, that's sitting on the table, so I can reach over and get my pitcher. Now this is a plastic pitcher. It's not going to make much noise, but remember, brain damage. So I get as cocked as I can and fling that pitcher at the door, and it goes over there. And I thought, well, this is not going to work. So I'm going to die. I try calling, but yelling, it didn't do any good at all. So I lay there for a while. I thought, Don, don't let him die. Do something. So the telephone is here. So I managed to scoot in the bed and get the phone and pull it up in the bed with me. Pick the receiver up, and the hospital number's on the thing. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. So I get the receiver up here, and with my one eye, I dial the hospital. And someone down in the lobby somewhere answers the phone. Good morning, Parkview Hospital. How may we help you? And I said, hello, can you connect me with the nurse's station at 4 West? One moment, please. I can hear the phone ringing. Ring-a-ding-a-ding, ring-a-ding-a-ding, ring-a. Answer the phone, folks. And somebody says, 3rd floor. I said, hi, this is Don Coomer. I'm in room 301, and I think I'm having another, and about that time the door opened, and sure enough, I had another clot and another MRI and more medication. But so you just have to be innovative. Probably the incident by breaking up the call device, that got a lot of attention in the hospital. A lot of things happened to one, and my story is not particularly significant other than I survived it. And the points that I want to make with this story, and I spent a month in the hospital, and finally I reached a point where they won't let me walk with a walker. I go through the walker bit and managed to bungle that. But in physical therapy, they were really intense on trying to get one back on one's feet to walk. And one of the things they use, the tools used in physical therapy, if you've ever been there, are simple tools that are just wonderful. For example, a grocery basket. Now, what would a grocery basket have to do with learning to walk? You stand behind the grocery basket, hold on to it, and it holds you up or steadies you, gives you balance while you walk. Not really, because I kept turning the basket over. My brain was built to where I kept trying to lean to the left, thinking that that's what it took to stand up. So I kept turning the basket over. So one of the physical therapists decided she would just ride in the basket. First they put books in the basket, weight in the basket. I kept turning it over. She got into the basket and started down this long hallway. And sure enough, I dumped her right But it's just part of the learning process. That didn't work all that well. But we kept doing it until I finally got my feet back under me. There came a time where finally I could walk with a cane. And he said, now, we're going to trust you after they had gone around the quadrangle with me 2 or 3 times holding on. We're going to trust you to do this by yourself, but you must walk next to the wall where you can hold on to the railing if you feel out of balance. My vision is beginning to clear up. Still got the patch on, but the blurriness is beginning to clear up just a little bit. So at that time, I'm only 55 years old. Still a young guy. So I'm paddling around this hallway, and I meet this gorgeous nurse. And probably the first time I've actually recognized a face in the hospital. And so I turned to look at her, and you can guess what happened next. I fell flat in the floor, and so everybody comes over to pick me up, and it's just another one of life's embarrassing moments. Once I'd like to leave some things with you as we talk about this. Dave Hackworth, who's a retired Army colonel, who's now deceased, in his biography, and if you're not familiar with Hackworth, he was quite a combat veteran, lots of combat, lots of medals, had major political difficulties with our government at the time that he was in Vietnam. He said that time distances the storyteller from the events themselves, as do the repeated tellings. And we just have to focus on what the important parts of those stories are. There's some things I like to remember, life's lessons that I learned going through this process. And I'll give credit for these to a fellow named Russ Harris, who is a PhD psychologist. As I lay in that bed, I had a lot of time to do a lot of thinking. An A-type personality, workaholic, business always in front of family, rarely taking time to do anything with family. Russ Harris said, a search for a pain-free existence is doomed to failure. So what I would like to stress is there is no such thing as a pain-free existence. Mine happened to be a stroke, later bypass surgery, later a ruptured gallbladder, later a ruptured appendix, later a torn retina. So there is no pain-free existence. But as long as we're alive, Russ Harris says, there is hope. Keep putting one foot in front of the other. Don't ever quit. And lastly, he said, experience trumps advice. And what he means there is our own life experience is more valuable to us than advice from any professional or your best intended friend or family member. There are things that family can do for us, and there are things that family can do for us. Family can't do your physical therapy for you. You couldn't do mine. In fact, family doesn't want you to hurt. Physical therapist doesn't care if you hurt, as long as you're doing physical therapy. And it does work when we do it like that. So finally graduation day comes after a month in physical therapy. And when they came and told me that I had gotten to where I could walk short distances with a cane, my speech had begun to clear up somewhat. Besides that, the insurance has paid for all they were going to pay for. So graduation day was coming, and they did a little ceremony when one left physical therapy, in-house physical therapy. So they came and told me that, Don, on Friday, we're going to let you go home. Then I continued without basic physical therapy, counseling, and lots of good attention, medical care. But when she told me that I could go home 3 days hence, you know, my first thought was, go home? Are you kidding? I can't go home. I developed after, at that time, almost 6 full weeks in the hospital, I developed a case of Stockholm Syndrome you couldn't believe. I felt secure there, but I wasn't sure about going home. So the graduation ceremony comes, and you do stuff like nuts and bolts and different buckets, and you put the washer on the bolt, screw the nut on it, and put it in this bucket. Those are big accomplishments. Don't ever think they're small accomplishments. The ability to put a nut on a bolt with a washer on it, and I did that and put them all over the little bowl, and I was so proud. It worked quite a sweat doing that, just perspiring like everything. And the occupational therapist came by and said, good job, Don. They just praise you to high heaven for your efforts. Now take them apart and put them back in the buckets, other buckets they came out of, hurt my feelings. I thought I'd done something. That's just part of the brain damage, and emotions are close to the surface. So graduation day, my wife comes, and I had told my physical therapist, her name was Jody, primary care person, physical therapist, lovely lady, owe her so much. She recently died of brain cancer. Beautiful person, put me back on my feet. So we get ready for a ceremony, my graduation ceremony, where I get to carry a pot of water, fill a pot of water, carry it from here over there, put it on the table, and then go pour it out in the sink and turn the stove on and turn it off, and those things to show. And I had warned Jody that my family was overly protective. I said, you know, I'm going to go home. I got to have some life. I don't want to be a prisoner. So Jody said, don't worry. Well, my son Tim had become the father figure in the family. He was Mr. Decision Maker. And so I warned Jody that that would be the case. We've got to give ourselves room to make mistakes and to recover from them. So sure enough, I'm doing my little old thing, and we're having an exit conference, and my son Tim in his best fatherly mode says, Jody, Mom works downtown during the day. Can we leave Dad alone? And to Jody's credit, she said, Tim, your father had a stroke. He's not stupid. Point, there's a difference. We may slur our speech. We may walk with a cane. We may struggle at times to keep our balance. If I get tired, I still have dizziness. I still have an imbalance problem. But there's a difference between those handicaps and being stupid, no matter how it looks from the outside. Then a couple of things that are my philosophy arising from that experience. Find your patient's or your neighbor or your family member's interest when they're recovering from a crisis. Focus on those interests because that keeps that individual focused on that recovery. They brought a guitar to me in rehab. I was so upset that I couldn't make a guitar chord, I sent it back home. The next day, the therapist had that guitar brought back in, whether I wanted it there or not. And because of that, I can now use this hand. Best therapy in the world because I had an interest in it and had played guitar for many, many years before that. There is no plateau to recovery, I'm convinced. I was told that in 18 months I would have recovered all that is recoverable of my old self. I told Fred Callahan I didn't agree with that I intended to continue to try to work at it. Years later, Fred finally admitted the idea of a plateau 9 months or 18 months after brain damage is now just a fiction. We don't know where the limit is, if there is a limit. So don't ever quit. Don't let your family member quit. Find the patient's point of interest. And there's some humor in everything. I mean, you know, we got to find humor in this life. Moreover, when you think your family member, your loved one, is in a coma, can't hear, be careful what you say. Yeah, be careful what you say because I heard every word. Moreover, a year later, I had open heart surgery, bypass surgery, and I'm one of the few people who came to a level of consciousness, came awake during bypass surgery. That was an interesting thing too. There was no pain, no discomfort, but I was awake and knew what was going on. And later, not for a long time, obviously, I went right back under and finished the thing, and I survived it. So later, during my exit visit with the surgeon, I told him what happened. He said, no. I said, that's your brain playing tricks on you. No, let me tell you what you said. And he said, yeah. He said, okay. So they wake up. He said, did you feel any pain? No pain. Did you feel any anxiety? No anxiety. He said, we know we could probably do that bypass surgery with you awake, but emotionally you couldn't deal with it. So Don't ever quit. Where I am today is I get fatigued sooner. With fatigue comes perseveration. Get hung on a word sometimes. I still have some balance issues. I'm a slower learner than I once was, but they have stuck my brain in an MRI machine and they tell me that it has rewired, that those electrons and synapses and so forth don't work like they used to, but they still work. And even though I'm a slow learner, I managed to finish a second master's degree after I recovered from the stroke. Depth perception. Now, I have 25% depth perception. Anybody want to go fly with me? Oh, by the way, they told me I'd never fly again. I got to tell you this. And my friend Fred Callahan, who is a neurologist, has a master's degree in aeronautical engineering, and decided after all of that schooling and education and so forth, decided he'd rather go be a physician. So he did, and went back to school, and that was not good enough. Then he did graduate work, became a neurologist. So he's an old flyer too. And so I asked him one day when I had all kind of hopes and ambitions laying in recovery in rehab, will I ever fly again? He said, no. I said, anytime you fly, you got to fly with me in the back of the airplane. Well, I did lose my medical. No, that's not right. I did not try to renew my airman's medical. Did anybody in here fly airplanes? Okay. You have to have a medical certificate to go with your pilot's license. So I knew I couldn't pass it because I had brain damage. So I never applied to renew my medical. So my flying days were over. But since I had never been refused a medical, I could get my license back to fly gliders. So I did go back to flying sailplanes and flew for years and years and years after that. It was nearly 10 years before I went back to flying. But just don't ever quit. And finally, my philosophy of life that I learned lying on my back in rehab, trying to learn to say words, trying to learn to read, trying to learn to walk. And depending upon your philosophy of life, I'm either the most blessed person you'll ever meet or one of the luckiest, and I'll take it either way. You don't have to have an opinion on every subject. And no use arguing about some things. You just don't have to have an opinion. And number two, don't expect people to agree with you. Keep your opinions and let the world go by. I'm happy to be here. In fact, I say I'm happy to be anywhere. And I guess if there's a moral to this or a lesson to my story, which is not an exciting story, it's just my story, is take care of those loved ones. When they're recovering, give them room. Don't ever quit. Just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Thanks for letting me come, folks.
Thank you, John. You exceeded expectations. That was excellent. Appreciate it.